We're on to the book of Ezekiel today, and well, it's going to get weird. So we've had Isaiah, which was deeply theological and really, really interesting, and then Jeremiah with his sort of a bit whingy and Lamentations even more so. Ezekiel has a massive shift off in the other direction and just goes, well, I mean, you judge for yourself, but it's going to be weird. I gather this is written after he's already been exiled, so there's a question mark over any prophecy in this one. I think there's a sort of suggestion at one point that there's a prophecy about what's going to happen, but it would seem it's already happened, so I assume I'm missing something there. It does note, though, that Ezekiel was a perfectly normal dude, just going along doing his thing until he hit age 30, and then it says that God spoke to him at that point. Boy, did God really speak to him with some really messed up stuff, which I shall show you in a minute. But it does seem the way that God speaks to Ezekiel is very different to how he's spoken to prophets before. We open anyway with this big vision that turns up to sort of mark the beginning of his prophet career. And it's quite a long section describing what this thing looks like. And I think rather than me trying to describe it to you, I shall just show you. This is about the best I could find on the internet, but it's completely messed up. And it's all about creatures with many heads, and they're all supporting this big throne thing with a glowing man on top, and there's wheels doing some weird stuff. And I gather this is supposed to be some sort of representation of the glory of God, which way back in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, that sort of thing, I was a bit grumbly about. No one seemed to bother describing what it looked like. I now know why. It's I suppose it should have been obvious, really. I mean, we weren't thinking about God being an old dude with a beard sat on a cloud. So I guess it would make sense that whatever visual representation of the glory of God is going to look weird. I also don't know what to do about who this glowing man is, because I mean, obviously the implication would presumably be that it's Jesus, but that's definitely not stated that it's going to be this Messiah chap coming to do anything. So I don't recall seeing that. And I'm sure, or if you ask lots of Christians, who is this guy? They'll say Jesus, but I suppose they would. So it's a difficult one to know what to do with. There's some more weirdness to come, which we'll come on to. But also, the odd bit in this is that God refers to Ezekiel as Son of Man. And we had encountered this before, back in Psalms, I think it was. And it's sort of cheating, isn't it? But I'm vaguely aware that Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man. But the difficulty is that Son of Man, I mean, you've got the question, what does that even mean? And there is an interesting footnote here which sort of helps. And it says that it translates the Hebrew Son of Man, translates literally as Ben Adam, which basically just means human being. So, I mean, we knew we had this problem coming at some point anyway, that we had to work out if Ezekiel is the Son of Man or a Son of Man, and Jesus says he's the Son of Man, they're not supposed to be the same thing. So I'm not quite sure how it works, but fortunately that's a problem for another day anyway. But it is just an odd way. God hasn't referred to any of the other prophets as Son of Man. And suddenly, it turns out there's 107 instances of the phrase Son of Man in the Old Testament. 93 of them are in the book of Ezekiel. It's just every other paragraph is Son of Man this and Son of Man that. And I gather there's only 190 in the entire Old and New Testament together, and Jesus does most of the other ones. But it just seems odd. Why does God suddenly refer to this guy by a different name or tone than everybody else? And it does beg the question, is this interpretation by Ezekiel? And as Ezekiel is referring to himself as Son of Man as his translation of what God is saying to him through weird visions and stuff like that. I don't quite know. There's another slightly odd bit as well in the way that God describes the Israelites and and just how terrible they've been to Ezekiel. When I first read it, it sounded like it was referring to a foreign nation or something, as in Ezekiel wasn't an Israelite. But as far as I'm aware, and as far as I can tell, he is. He's already in Babylon. But I don't think that particularly matters, but there we go. Getting back to the weird, there's talk of a hand stretched out with a scroll, and on this scroll is lamentations, woe, and something else miserable anyway, basically probably something to do with Jeremiah. And this thing comes out, and you're like, okay, fine. But then God tells Ezekiel to eat the scroll. And, I mean, you can sort of imagine it, can't you? He's sitting there, minding his own business, his hand stretches out of wherever, and hands you a scroll. Oh, thank you very much. And then the voice tells you, eat it. And it's like, I'm sorry, you want me to what? I would rather have a burger. I mean, to be fair, God tells him to do it, and he does. So, good prophet. Apparently it tastes of honey. So, yeah, a bit strange. A bit strange. A lot strange, but there we go. It's keeping with the tone of Ezekiel at this point. God also, as part of this, makes clear to Ezekiel that he's going to be held responsible if he doesn't go and do all his bit to tell the Israelites that what they need to do and all the rest of it. And I don't think we've had that before yet, and there wasn't any suggestion that Ezekiel wasn't going to do it, but it's been stated. I did wonder, does that extend as an imperative to everybody who believes in God that they should be doing that? I guess there's an argument for that, but then at the same time, prophets are definitely a different league of people, and they are special, aren't they? So, yeah, not quite sure. For some more weird, we then have God comes to Ezekiel and says, right, what I want you to do is make a clay model of the city of Jerusalem under siege, and then I want you to go and lie down on your left side for 390 days to sort of bear the sins of Israel, the non-Judah part of Israel. And then once you've done that, I want you to lie on your other side for 40 days to bear the sins of Judah. And you're like, okay, right. I mean, I quite like the mechanics for how sin is managed. That was the interesting thing that came out of Leviticus, but between all the boring directional type bit. I mean, we had the scapegoat back then, but now we've got a guy lying on his side for over a year. I mean, is it continuous? He's just got to sit there and wait for 390 days? I guess it makes sense in the sense that the Israel side is behaving far worse than the Judah side. When they're both bad, but the Judah side does seem a little better. So you're spending longer on the Israel side than you are on the Judah side. But yeah, we then double down, of course, and then at some point, Ezekiel, so he needs to shave all his hair off, and then he take a third and burn it. Okay, take another third and scatter it to the wind. And then take another third and go around some city. I can't remember which one it was, and it's too weird to go back and look at it again. But he has to walk around the city with this third of hair in his hand and whack it with a sword. Yeah. With a bit more context that came a little bit later on, it did make a bit more sense in that God's talking about 2/3 of the Israelites are going to meet their demise and die. Another third are then going to be scattered to the wind. So I suppose a third burnt and a third whacked with a sword sort of suggests that you can see how that might be a representation of what happens, but why? I mean, it's so odd. And a lot of Ezekiel's job is to shout to people about what's going on, and I just don't know what to do with that. We then have God prophesizing cannibalism, which we've had mentioned several times before, so this is not new. I mean, it's weird, but it's not new. But the prophecy part is weird in that, because Ezekiel is already in Babylon, so presumably that's already happening, so it's not really a prophecy. And I don't quite know if I've just missed something there. The prophecy stuff is a little bit iffy anyway. The Isaiah one is interesting just because it sounds like Jesus and it was definitely written before. But this Ezekiel stuff could well have been written after it already happened, so it doesn't seem to have any value as prophecy. That being said, I was listening in the car earlier to an interview with a chap who was talking about all the prophecy from around here, and accepting it at face value that scholars say it was written by other people later, but I don't think it was. And it's a difficult position to argue with any sort of reason, isn't it? So, if you've got the potential for an explanation that says, oh no, someone just wrote it later, you've kind of got to go with that, I think, if you're being reasonable. And I say it doesn't really matter in the sense of the Jesus predictions in Isaiah, but it does matter in this. So I'm basically just going to ignore that, I think. One brief footnote, actually. Every time Babylon is mentioned, there's a footnote in the Bible that says, or Chaldeans. And I sort of thought this was, I've been ignoring this, and I kind of thought it was some sort of translation thing. Are they not sure if it's Babylonians or the Chaldeans? So I had a little Google. I don't want to go too far off piece with this, but just because it was bugging me, it kept coming up. And it seems the Chaldeans were a people who comprised part of the Babylonian Empire or something like that, to such an extent that at one point you could actually refer interchangeably between Babylon or Chaldea, something like that. So I don't think it's actually of particular key interest or anything for us going on here. But it's nice to have that sort of ticked off and have a vague understanding. Okay, they are the same thing. It's not a weird translation. But yeah, so that's extraordinarily weird. And we haven't had anything that weird for quite a while, I think, which is, I guess I've just got used to things being a bit more normal. I mean, in biblical terms, obviously. But this is weird even in biblical terms. But yeah, so the next bit we shall do, I've already read, and actually there's some really interesting stuff in that. So on we shall go and see what's there.